So I'll start with segments 9 and 25. There have been two very big misconceptions about 9 and 25. We do have a 230 kilovolt line that runs from our Ross substation down in Vancouver up to Lexington. And we've got most, if not all, of the land available to us there on the east side of that right-of-way where we could actually place another line. There are some places where the right-of-way narrows a little bit, where development has encroached on those segments, but we would be able to put another power line next to that line on that right-of-way. And that's one of the points of confusion that people have with the Oregon routes as well. I figure I'll address that since Commissioner Stewart brought it up. We do have rights-of-way in Oregon that are parallel to that. What we don't have in Oregon is the situation we have there on that Ross-Lexington line. We actually own property adjacent to that existing line. We don't have that at our disposal in Oregon. So that's what we're saying when we say we don't have right-of-way there. We certainly do have rights-of-way there, but we don't have right-of-way where we can actually build like we do there on segments 9 and 25. A lot of people think that anything that's shaded in yellow on those segments are places that we would have to take or properties that would have to be removed. That's absolutely not true. 9 and 25. That's just that 500 or so yard corridor that we've designated for notification to people who would potentially be affected by our plans there. So we wouldn't need to take all of those properties that are shaded in yellow along those corridors.
Building on our existing right-of-way, 9 and 25, is a real possibility for us, and that's why we're studying it.
Politically answered very well. Building it with the standard power line structure on the existing right-of-way.
Yeah, one would anticipate that building a overhead transmission line on existing right-of-way would be cheaper than on new right-of-way.
For major earthquakes when studying possible locations for this transmission line, and if so, would a location east of the Cascades how would a location east of the Cascades compare with one located west of the Cascades as far as possible damage or disruption from a major earthquake?
Yeah, generally earthquake loads don't rule on transmission line towers, and by the load on a sunny day like today, it's designed to carry the load when it rains, but the governing load is probably the snow load, so it's designed for snow. That's why it's probably a lot beefier than it needs to be for a normal day like today. So for transmission lines and towers, they're designed for wind and ice, and that ends up being a much bigger load than an earthquake. So they're designed well beyond what an earthquake load would cause on it. The exception to that is if the earthquake causes a landslide, then everything we're standing on is gone, and we try to design and place towers to avoid landslides, but that's the kind of failure that could happen from an earthquake.
Other groups are geez, those just go together so well for me, are using incidents around the country of power lines falling in neighborhoods and people being electrocuted. Our technical advisor points out these are distribution lines like those used by the power company, not transmission lines like BPA's. Have BPA transmission lines fallen in neighborhoods and electrocuted people? And then the follow-up is, when towers fall, we're being told it's unlikely that they fall sideways outside of the right-of-way. And can you explain from an engineering standpoint quickly why that is?
Well, since it is transmission, it's very important that it stays up, because it doesn't just go to a neighborhood. It powers utilities and entire states. So we build a very robust system that's very stable. Occasionally there's an extreme event, such as some heavy ice loading and high winds that can take down a tower, or a landslide, or just the whole piece of land that the tower used to sit on is just gone now. So there are rare occasions where the lines do come down. In general, a transmission line steel lattice tower, like we would propose building for this line, tends to collapse rather than fall over. So if it gets overloaded, it would tend to kind of crumble and stay within the existing right-of-way. And on rare occasions would the conductor even make it to the ground.
What happens before it touches it? If the ground, if the cable snaps, what happens? Does it shut off?
If they're just, I just don't know of any occasion where the conductor has broken, because it's very strong. But if the as soon as the electricity makes it to ground, then it trips off. You know, there's switches that just trip off. So,
and then as far as these towers could come down in your neighborhood, what our advisor has said is when they fall, if they fall, just given the tension, high tension power lines, if one tower goes, it creates force to the next tower and back. In other words, it's next to impossible. I mean, you can't never say never, but they aren't going to fall. If you had to bet, it's a great chance it's not going to fall sideways. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's very, very small chance that it would fall sideways. They tend to collapse or partially crumble. And you know, if a wire breaks, then you have all of a sudden you have tension on another tower. So you could have a couple towers that tend to partially collapse, but they're designed to not cascade for miles.
Yeah, as far as though falling over like a big redwood onto somebody's house, not likely at all.
Again, the only reason I could see that ever happening is if a giant landslide takes out everything in the area, and you're all of a sudden your foundation doesn't look so big.
All right, we've got two groups of questions here. The first one that was asked by many: what is the latest status of the gray line that we keep hearing about?
BPA over the past couple of years has gotten lots of suggestions on different routes to consider for this new line that we're studying. In recent months, we've gotten several suggestions for a more northerly route that would go over the top of Silver Lake and potentially farther east. One of those people or groups that presented one of those alternatives is, I believe, now calling it the gray line, but we've gotten several different options suggested to us. So what we did several months ago is that we directed the siting team to go out and develop a more northerly route that went around Silver Lake and see if there was a good route up there to consider. It didn't necessarily follow what's being called the gray line, but again, we had several suggestions for different routes up there. So yeah, we looked at aerial photographs and maps and spent some time out in the field. I went out in the field with the siting team several times. And certainly there are any number of possible routes to build this new line. In developing a possible route farther to the north, we discovered several things. One, that it eliminated impacts on, of course, everybody else that's on the existing lines we're considering, the existing routes. It avoided impacts to them, obviously. But it brought in, of course, a new set of people with land and homes and property, and would affect all of them. Mostly it's off into the woods. It goes around Silver Lake, down across the Lewis River. And in general, it puts it farther out. It makes it more difficult to construct. It makes it longer. It makes it more costly. It starts to involve more remote sites, harder to get to in bad weather. There are plant and animal impacts that are different the farther you move up into the mountains. So what we determined was that although, again, any line you draw on a map is a route we could physically build, that this did not add to the palette of options we already had. We already have a really good option that uses mainly existing right-of-way, and we have a couple of options that go up into the foothills, including our current most easterly route that is mostly on forested land. So we're confident that we have a good set of different alternatives to study in more detail and carry into the draft EIS. So we concluded to not add another route to the current map that we have.